Well, that was, like I was telling you, my first experience that I can remember of going to the movies. And it was a theater there close to my aunt's house. And it was called La Avalon. And of course it was a Spanish movie, Mexican actors. And Cantinflas was one of the men that I remember, one of the actors that I remember, who later on started making American movies. But at the time he was a very famous comedian, Mexican comedian. Very funny guy. And so I remember that. That's my earliest that I can think of black and white movie. Looking at that movie then and looking at those movies now, I look at them from a different perspective, because some of those movies had a message. And when you're a kid, you just don't know, how adults are thinking and the messages that are in those movies. But as I got older, and now that I can see all these movies from a different perspective. Then as I got older, of course, I started going to well, I didn't go to the movies by myself, but my next movie that I can remember was, the Gone with the Wind. And the reason it's probably so impressionable is because it was, the colors were so beautiful. And the actors, the actors were the man was very handsome and the woman was very beautiful. And it was about Civil War, during the Civil War. And back then I didn't understand about Civil War and what people went through during a wartime situation. And basically I remember now that it was a rich family and they lost everything they had, and their beautiful home ended up in shatters due to the war. And so I see the difference now, when I see the same movie. I can watch the same movie over and over, because that's one of the things about good movies, is they endure the test of time. After that, I started going to the movies by myself, and there was a theater close to where my mom and dad had a radio and TV shop, and it was called the Port Theater. It was on Port Street. And of course, like I told you earlier, we usually had to pay. There used to be some hoodlums in the door waiting for me to get in, for us to get in, and we all had to give them a penny or a nickel or something. And we had our money in our socks, so they wouldn't know how much money we had. And then I think the movies were like a quarter, and popcorn and everything was not very expensive. But they used to have black and white movies. Most of them were black and white, and I remember a lot of Abbott and Costello, a lot of Three Stooges, Captain Video, The Lone Ranger and Tonto. And I look at the Lone Ranger and Tonto movie now, and I think about the difference. And the way I think about it now is that Tonto was the Indian, and the Lone Ranger, was the cowboy, and Tonto helped the Lone Ranger get things done. And of course now they make jokes about Tonto and the Lone Ranger, and they say, well, maybe the Lone Ranger was actually helping Tonto, so times have changed about the way they do movies. A lot of World War II movies, beautiful movies that were very inspiring. Pilots flying, and Navy, and so I saw a lot of movies of pilots and flying airplanes, and I wanted to be a pilot, fly one of those Sky Raiders. Then they started making movies of pilots, Navy pilots flying jets, and so I wanted to be a jet pilot, and that's inspired me to want to learn to fly, in which I've been interested in aviation all my life, and I did finally get my pilot's license, and I learned to fly, and of course I spent my military career working and flying airplanes.
You told me about the minorities.
Of course, again, talking about minorities and Tonto and stuff like that. Back then, when I was younger, minorities would come in, and they were usually like second roles, or the difference now, of course, a lot of minorities have leading roles. And back then, usually the protagonist, or I guess you call the main leading roles were white guys and white women, and so we're conditioned, you know. But young people nowadays, looking at it now, I can see, well, you know, not only white people can be successful, but also minorities. So things have changed a lot. Hollywood has changed a lot of that. All of the movies that I saw as a child were the good guy wins. And so the good guy wins, and being bad, bad things happen to bad people. So you didn't want to be a bad guy, you want to be a good guy. So that had a big impact on the way my moral compass, so to speak, and the way I wanted to do things as I was a child and even as an adult, you know. So now, of course, you see movies that are extremely bloody and graphic, which, you know, they really, you know, for me, they don't have to do that, but for some reason, I think people have even now become synthesized to the blood and the guts, and it's unfortunate because you don't need to know a lot of details. As a matter of fact, I think somewhere I read that your imagination can really show you more than the actual picture. And that's why back in the older days they didn't have to show all those pictures, because you could use your imagination and imagine what it was going to look like. So the difference is quite a bit from when I was a child to nowadays, to be honest with you. There's very few movies that I'm happy with when I go see, because they have extremely too much sex and curse words, and the bad guy wins a lot. There was one period there during the adult the bad guy always had to win. All of a sudden the bad guy's winning. The bad guy wins. Also there was a lot of movies of anti-authority. You know, the military was stupid, the military did bad things, they were the bad guys. That was really bad. As a matter of fact, that was during the time when I spent so much time in the military, back during Vietnam. And things are changing now. Now they've made the movies where they show the military as defending the country and doing the right thing and doing the right thing for their country. So even attitudes have changed during that Vietnam era, where they're more respectful to the military now. And during the time I was in the military, you didn't wear your uniform in town for fear that somebody's going to throw a rock at you. And toward my retirement, then I managed to, the movies came out with the soldiers doing the right thing, and during Gulf War and stuff like that, when I was on active duty, I even had people thank me, for being in the military. So the movies have a tremendous impact on how young people grow up and how they think. And I think a lot about that. Of course, being a psychology major in school, I really think a lot about the impact that movies have on people. A lot of people see movies when they want to emulate and do what's in the movies nowadays, and there's a lot of movies in there that show not so good things to young people and adults.